Malik Carter had never been this close to a dream before and never more at risk of losing it. The pilot's lounge was quieter than he imagined, but to Malik it was sacred ground, a sanctuary reserved for those who had conquered the skies. At 16, he didn't have wings yet, but he had a badge and behind it, a heart beating with purpose. He had earned this spot fair and square, chosen from hundreds of applicants for the Vanguard Flight Initiative. He wasn't trespassing, he was arriving. He sank into a leather chair, his eyes locked on the TV screen broadcasting a documentary about the evolution of commercial aircraft. His mind soared alongside the engines and fuselages until the door slammed open. "Excuse me," a woman's voice barked, sharp and loaded with suspicion. "Who let you in here?" Malik turned, startled, facing a woman in a crisp navy uniform. 4 gold stripes gleamed on her shoulders. Captain Dana Kirkland. Her eyes scanned him like a threat. I'm part of the student program. Ms. Ellis from HR said, "I don't care what anyone told you." She cut him off, pulling a radio from her belt. "Security, I've got a young male unauthorized in the pilot's lounge, possibly using a fake ID. Send a team, now." Everything stopped. The air in the room thickened as Malik stood frozen, still holding his guest pass like a lifeline. But his badge, his words, none of it mattered. Not to her. Not when she had already made up her mind. To Captain Kirkland, Malik wasn't a student. He wasn't a future pilot. He was a threat, a black kid in the wrong room. And just like that, the room that once represented his highest hopes became the place where his character and humanity were put on trial, and no one else was speaking up. Malik's fingers tightened around the lanyard of his badge, his knuckles pale against the fabric. He tried to breathe, to ground himself, but his heart pounded so loudly it drowned out reason. "Ma'am, please," he said, voice unsteady but respectful. "This badge is real. I'm part of the Vanguard Flight Initiative. Ms. Ellis brought me in herself." Captain Kirkland didn't budge. Her eyes, ice cold, narrowed as she stepped closer and ripped the badge from his neck, the strap snapping with a cruel pop that echoed through the room. She turned it over in her hand, glanced briefly, and scoffed. "Fake," she declared. "I knew it. A kid like you doesn't belong here." Her words cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. Malik stood frozen, his mouth open, unable to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, this was an accusation, a dangerous one that painted him as a liar, an infiltrator, maybe even something worse. Captain Kirkland raised her voice again, this time deliberately loud enough to draw attention from the hallway. "We have a potential breach," she said into her radio. "This young man may be attempting to access secure pilot facilities using fraudulent credentials. Could be trying to gather intel or tamper with equipment." Heads began to turn. Through the glass wall of the lounge, Malik saw pilots and staff pause, glance inside, whisper. A few began stepping closer, curiosity flickering in their eyes, not concern, not empathy, just that familiar suspicion. That subtle, sharpening tension he'd felt before in other spaces where people weren't sure if he belonged. He swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, barely above a whisper. "I was told I could wait here. Please just call Miss Ellis." But his voice felt like a raindrop falling into a storm. Captain Kirkland had already cast the verdict, and the audience outside was beginning to believe it. Malik could feel their eyes scanning him, judging him. And deep down, he knew, if no one intervened, this wouldn't end with questions. It would end with consequences. As footsteps approached from the corridor, growing heavier, closer, Malik realized he was no longer a guest here. He was the suspect. And in a room full of trained professionals, he was the only one fighting to prove he was real. The footsteps stopped just outside the lounge. 2 security officers stepped in, both middle-aged, both serious, their eyes scanning the room before settling firmly on Malik. "That him?" one of them asked. Captain Kirkland didn't hesitate. She pointed directly at Malik. "Yes, that's the intruder. He's not authorized to be here. I want him removed and questioned immediately." Malik took a step back, instinctively raising his hand slightly, not in surrender, but in defense of his truth. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't sneak in. I was invited. Ms. Ellis from HR gave me the badge. You can call her. I'm not lying." One of the officers glanced at the badge now in Kirkland's hand, then back at Malik. "You got ID?" Malik reached for his wallet with trembling fingers, the room spinning slightly from panic. Yes, I have my school ID, and the badge they gave me." But before he could pull it out, Captain Kirkland interjected sharply. "That won't be necessary. It's already clear he doesn't belong." This is a restricted area. He's already lied once. The officer hesitated, unsure. But Kirkland's confident tone, backed by years of status and authority, seemed to override the doubt. The second officer subtly moved closer to Malik. Outside the glass, a small crowd had gathered. Airport staff, pilots, interns. Some leaned closer, others held phones. No one said a word. Not one person asked what the boy had to say. The silence screamed louder than the accusations. Malik's throat tightened. His hands were shaking now. The fear was real, but something deeper, humiliation, burned hotter. "Can I just call my dad?" he asked, desperate, his voice so raw it barely made it out. "He'll explain. He's with the National Aeronautics Administration. Please just let me call him." Captain Kirkland scoffed, loud enough for the room to hear. "Go ahead. Maybe he can clean this up before the press gets wind of it, assuming he's not one of the janitors here." A few soft chuckles fluttered through the crowd. Malik's heart shattered. He turned away, opened his phone, and hit speed dial. Every ring that passed was like a countdown, not to rescue, but to collapse. His back pressed against the wall, his pride hanging by a thread. Then a voice. "Malik? What's going on?" Malik closed his eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he let his breath shake. "Dad, I need you. Dad, I need you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Malik could hear the subtle shift in his father's voice from concern to control, the calm command that always surfaced when something serious was unfolding. "Malik, I'm on my way. Don't move. Don't say anything else. Just stay where you are. I'll handle it." Those words were like a rope tossed to a drowning man. Malik nodded silently, even though his father couldn't see. He lowered the phone, his hands still trembling, but something inside him shifted, not calm, but clarity. For the first time since Captain Kirkland burst into the lounge, he felt like he wasn't completely alone. He leaned his head against the cool wall, eyes unfocused as the muffled murmurs of the crowd faded into the background. His mind slipped not in fear, but in search of grounding, and without meaning to, he found himself drifting back to a memory that had never left him. He was 6 years old again, standing beneath the towering wing of a Boeing 777 at Lincoln Ridge Airfield, holding his father's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. It was Malik's birthday, and Daniel Carter, newly promoted at the National Aeronautics Administration, had pulled every string to give his son a private tour of the airport. "Look up, Malik," his father had said. "That's where you belong." That day, Malik had watched a plane take off from only a few feet away, the roar of the engines vibrating in his chest. His eyes lit up with something stronger than wonder purpose. Later, his dad sat him in a mock cockpit simulator, showed him diagrams, explained how lift and thrust worked. And from that day forward, Malik never stopped dreaming. He filled his bedroom with models. He read flight manuals like other kids read comic books. He sketched control panels by memory, nailed aircraft trivia, and practiced in flight sims late into the night. But more than anything, he remembered the words his father always said when he doubted himself. "You belong to the sky, son. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Back in the present, Malik straightened up slightly, wiping at the corners of his eyes before any tears could fall. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a spark of defiance had returned. They could question his badge, they could mock his presence, but they couldn't erase who he was or where he was going. The hum of the lounge was growing louder now, footsteps, whispers, the quiet click of phones recording. Malik stood still, back straight, heart hammering in his chest. He had no idea how long it had been since the call, but each passing second felt like a year. Then, suddenly the room fell silent. The double doors swung open with forceful purpose. Every head turned. A man stepped through, dressed in a dark suit, eyes sharp, posture calm, but commanding. Behind him trailed two others in NOA badges, their faces unreadable but serious. Daniel Carter had arrived. He walked straight toward Malik, not slowing, not looking left or right. Malik's breath caught in his throat. "Are you okay, son?" Daniel asked, his voice low but warm, a calm in the eye of the storm. He placed a steady hand on Malik's shoulder, grounding him in a way no one else in the room could. "I'm fine. Now," Malik whispered, though his voice still trembled. Daniel nodded once, then turned and the air shifted. Every eye was on him, but he focused only on one person, Captain Dana Kirkland. Her posture, once proud and stiff with authority, faltered slightly. Her confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped hesitation. She clearly hadn't expected this. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said, voice louder now, projecting through the stunned silence. Administrator at the National Aeronautics Administration. I was just informed that my son was publicly accused of being a security threat while participating in a federally recognized flight initiative. He let the words hang. Kirkland blinked, then tried to recover. Mr. Carter, I didn't know he was your... I was only acting out of concern for aviation safety. Daniel cut her off, his tone cool, measured, and razor sharp. You didn't need to know who he was. You only needed to do your job responsibly. Did you verify his credentials before calling security? Or did you decide based on what he looked like that he couldn't possibly belong here? No answer, just silence. Heavy, damning silence. The crowd shifted, the tension turning. Malik felt it too, the balance of power tilting. For the first time since this nightmare began, the judgment wasn't on him. It was on her. The silence in the lounge was suffocating. Captain Kirkland opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her gaze dropped for the first time, no longer the dominating figure, but someone caught in the wrong and scrambling to stay upright. Daniel Carter's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You called my son an intruder, a threat, a possible spy, all without verifying a single fact. You stripped his badge, humiliated him in front of staff, and allowed your personal bias to take precedence over protocol. He turned to the two security officers who now stood at attention, eyes lowered slightly. You're trained to investigate, to assess. Did either of you ask for a second source before acting? Did you attempt to contact HR? Or did you simply follow an accusation without question because of who it came from? One of them shifted awkwardly. The other cleared his throat but said nothing. Daniel didn't wait for their response. He motioned to one of the NADA agents behind him, who stepped forward, a sleek tablet already open in his hands. We've already pulled the surveillance footage from this lounge. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The agent tapped the screen, then turned it toward a mounted monitor on the far wall. The footage played silently, Ms. Ellis escorting Malik into the lounge, smiling and handing him the badge. She pointed to a seat and exited moments later. Then Malik sitting quietly, watching the screen, not moving, not touching a thing. Then Kirkland entered. Everyone watched as the scene unfolded, the confrontation, the snatching of the badge, Malik trying to explain. Every detail was clear. Every doubt evaporated. By the time the footage ended, the room was dead still. Kirkland's face had lost all color. Daniel let the silence speak, then delivered the final blow. This footage speaks louder than any excuse. What you did wasn't protocol. It was prejudice. The murmurs began low but growing. Heads turned away from Kirkland now. Some eyes flicked toward Malik with a mixture of guilt and regret. Malik stood next to his father, heart pounding not from fear anymore but from something unfamiliar. Justice. And it had a voice now. His father's. Captain Kirkland stood frozen, her mouth a tight line, arms crossed no longer out of authority, but as if shielding herself from the truth now flashing across the screen. The room had turned cold toward her. The confident staff who once stood behind her now watched in uneasy silence. Daniel Carter didn't let the momentum falter. He turned slightly to the NOBA investigator at his side. Show them the file. With practiced efficiency, the agent brought up another document on the tablet this time. Not a video, but a detailed report. The monitor flickered as a new screen replaced the footage. A name appeared at the top. Captain Dana Kirkland Personnel Conduct Review, 2019 to 2024. The crowd stirred. The investigator began reading aloud. 3 formal complaints over the past 5 years. 2 involving passengers of color. 1 involving a new co-pilot trainee who resigned within 3 months of assignment to her flight crew. All 3 cases were closed without resolution due to lack of sufficient evidence or being deemed internal matters. Kirkland's expression cracked not just from shock, but exposure. She knew what was coming. This isn't a one-time lapse in judgment, Daniel said, his tone sharper now. This is a pattern, a history, a failure in leadership allowed to continue unchecked. He scanned the room, locking eyes with the Horizon Airlines manager who had been standing silently near the back. How many times does a complaint need to be filed before someone listens? No one answered. They didn't have to. The implications hung in the air. Kirkland wasn't the only one at fault. The system that protected her, that dismissed, ignored, or buried these complaints had allowed her to flourish. And Malik, like others before him, had paid the price. Daniel stepped forward, voice firm but controlled. Effective immediately, I'm requesting a full independent investigation not just into today's incident but into Horizon's internal handling of employee conduct, security protocol, and complaint resolution. The NABA will be leading it. Kirkland, pale and cornered, finally spoke. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, Daniel said, cool and final. This is proportionate. This is accountability. The crowd no longer looked at Kirkland with trust. They looked at her like a symbol of everything they now realized needed to change. And in the middle of it all, Malik stood silently, watching a door that had once been shut tight begin to crack open not just for him, but for everyone after him. The tension in the lounge lingered even after Daniel Carter's final words. Captain Kirkland had been escorted out silently, her reputation left behind in the form of unread complaints and unspoken truths. But something else remained in the air, a shift, a current of awareness that could no longer be ignored. Malik stood quietly beside his father, the weight of everything that had happened finally catching up to him. He wasn't angry anymore, just tired of defending his presence, tired of proving his worth, tired of pretending the badge around his neck had been enough. Then, from the crowd, a figure stepped forward. She wore the same navy blue uniform as the others, but her presence was different, calm, strong, warm. Her captain's stripes gleamed subtly beneath the lounge's lighting. Her skin, like Malik's, told a story before she ever opened her mouth. I'm Captain Aisha Monroe, she said, voice steady and kind. I saw what happened, and I want you to know it shouldn't have. You didn't deserve that. Malik blinked. He hadn't expected compassion. Not now, not like this. Thank you, he said softly, unsure of what else to offer. Captain Monroe smiled gently. You handled yourself better than most adults would have. That took strength, real strength. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough for only Malik and his father to hear. When I started flying, I was told more than once that I didn't look like a pilot, that I didn't belong in the cockpit. But I stayed, I flew, and now I teach others how to rise above those voices. Malik looked up at her, something flickering behind his eyes, the first spark of light in hours. I have a flight in 2 hours, she continued. How would you like to come see the cockpit, the real thing? You've earned more than just an apology. You deserve to see where you're headed. Malik looked to his father. Daniel gave him a proud, approving nod. As he followed Captain Monroe through the now silent hallway, Malik felt something shift inside him. The pain wasn't gone, but it was finally making room for something else. Hope. Would you like to continue into Chapter 9, Voices for Change, where Malik takes on the role of youth ambassador and joins his father in advocating for reform? The cockpit of Captain Monroe's aircraft was everything Malik had imagined, and more. It wasn't just the panels and switches or the glowing displays that made it magical. It was the feeling, the quiet confidence, the sense of belonging. As he slid into the co-pilot's seat, hands hovering above the controls, he realized, this isn't just a dream, it's a destination. Captain Monroe smiled from the captain's chair. This is where you're going, Malik. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That moment stayed with him not just through the rest of the day, but through the weeks that followed. Because what came next was something Malik never could have predicted. His story, captured by bystanders and later published in a national aviation blog, went viral. Within days, he was flooded with messages, some apologizing, others thanking him for speaking out, and many more saying, that could have been me. Daniel Carter, already a respected voice in the industry, seized the moment. Together with senior officials at the NABA, he launched the Sky Belongs to All of Us initiative, a national campaign aimed at increasing diversity in aviation and dismantling racial bias in industry training, hiring, and youth outreach. And at the center of it, Malik. He became the campaign's youth ambassador, visiting schools, speaking at leadership summits, and sitting on panels beside his father, sharing his experience not as a cautionary tale, but as a call to action. The first time he stepped on stage to speak, he stood nervously at the podium, palms sweating. But as he scanned the faces in the crowd, kids who looked just like him, eyes wide with potential, he found his voice. I was told, without being heard, that I didn't belong. But what I learned is that belonging isn't something someone gives you. It's something you claim. And I'm claiming it for myself, and for all of you. The applause that followed wasn't just loud, it was hopeful. Malik knew this was only the beginning. What had started in a lounge full of silence was now echoing across the country, carried by young voices ready to fly higher than anyone thought they could. The day of Malik's first supervised flight simulation came faster than he expected. It wasn't a test, it wasn't an evaluation, it was something more important, a promise kept. A moment he'd dreamed of since childhood finally taking shape, not in secret, not in the shadows, but in full view of those who once doubted him and those now cheering him on. The hangar buzzed quietly with anticipation. Officials from the NOAA, instructors from the Vanguard Flight Initiative, a few close friends, and of course his father, Daniel, stood proudly off to the side, arms crossed, eyes fixed on his son. As Malik stepped into the sleek simulator room, he was met by a familiar figure. Captain Aisha Monroe stood at the controls, waiting. "You ready to take the left seat, Captain Carter?" she said, smiling. Malik grinned, nerves fluttering in his stomach, but no longer fear. He slid into the seat and ran his hand over the throttle with reverence. "I've been ready." The room dimmed, and the simulation powered on clouds forming in digital skies, runways glowing below, the dashboard lighting up like a constellation. As the wheels lifted off the virtual ground, Malik felt something inside him take off too. This was no longer about proving anything, it was about becoming. When the session ended and the simulated jet taxied to a flawless stop, the room erupted in applause. Daniel was the first to reach him, pulling his son into a tight, wordless embrace. Malik didn't need his father to say anything. That embrace carried every message he needed. "I'm proud of you. You did it. You belong." Later that evening, Malik stood on the tarmac, the real runway stretching out behind him. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the wings of nearby aircraft. The wind tugged gently at his flight jacket, as if urging him forward. He looked up at the sky, wide, open, endless. "This is mine too," he thought. "It always was." And with that, Malik Carter, the boy who had once been pushed to the margins of a dream, stepped fully into the center of it. Because no matter who tries to clip your wings, the sky always remembers who it's meant to carry. Life lesson: the power of dignity, justice, and standing up for what's right. The story of young Malik Carter reminds us that injustice, no matter how subtle or overt, still exists even in places we least expect. But more importantly, it shows us the unshakable value of dignity, courage, and integrity. In a world where quick judgments often replace careful listening, Malik's experience calls on us all to examine our own biases and responsibilities, not just as individuals, but as part of a larger community. For older generations, who have witnessed decades of change, this story reaffirms a timeless truth. When one voice rises with truth and is backed by the wisdom and strength of those who came before, even the most entrenched systems can be challenged. Whether in our families, workplaces, or communities, we must never remain silent in the face of injustice. Because real change, the kind that shapes generations, begins not with power, but with courage guided by conscience. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.